Thanks everyone for joining us to speak with a few of the many Dwight Hall Summer Fellows, and these are 3 of the 5 that Jana in specifically is supporting. And we hope to learn from them their stories, what brought them to Yale, what brought them to the projects, and kind of what they've been learning, which is terrific. So I appreciate you guys taking time. I know you're probably busy, and it's really a great gift to us to be able to support the work that you do and to learn through you kind of what it's like on the ground. So thanks again. And I'm going to kind of go around the grid and we'll start. If you could tell us a little bit about yourself, and let's start at like Yale. You can tell us as much you want about your background, but kind of what brought you to Yale and how your experiences so far. So Theo, you're top of my screen here. So why don't you go ahead and start?
Sure. Well, thank you everybody for having us. My name's Theo. I'm a class of 2024 in Branford College at Yale. And I guess what brought me to Yale, that's a good question. I think obviously I was looking for somewhere that had strong academics, but I think what really set Yale apart out in my mind was kind of like the student community that I got while I was touring campus specifically. It seemed very much like I went into this tour kind of hesitant, thinking everyone was going to be super stressed out and fighting each other, but that really wasn't the case. And I think that was I saw that it was it's kind of cheesy, but everyone calls the community very collaborative. And I think too, in a lot of ways, that's really true. And I've seen that, especially in some of these circles like Dwight Hall. So I think that's something I was looking for and have definitely found at Yale.
Excellent. Good. We'll come back to some of your specific kind of work and major interests in academic and activities. So Laura, let's go to you. You're next on my screen.
Hi, everyone. Echoing what Theo said. So I'm a class of 2023. I'll be a senior this year. I'm in Stiles College, majoring in history. And what brought me to Yale? Yale was never on my radar in high school. It seemed like a place that no one I'd ever known had been to, and just seemed actually absurd to be able to go to Yale and to a place like Yale, but I ended up applying and getting in, and that. So I was just shocked and elated, and that was more of my journey. But I think what Theo was saying, I also knew a lot about Dwight Hall actually coming in, and I knew a lot about Yale's, the Yale Undergraduate Prison Project and other organizations like that. I also knew that there was a lot of financial aid and a lot of support for unpaid internships, or I had a general idea of that, which I really was excited about. So yeah.
That's great. Thank you. Patrick, welcome.
Hi, everybody. I'm Patrick. I'm in the class of 2024 in Solon College. I'm also a history major. I'm from Arkadelphia, Arkansas, which is a small town in Southwest Arkansas. And I think similar to Laura, and probably similar to Theo as well, this Yale was just kind of like a dream pie in the sky kind of thing. And I got lucky and got in. So that was great. But I think really what, like both you and Laura have said, I think the intentional creation of community, both in residential spaces and otherwise, is something I was oh, that sounds pretty interesting. And that sounds like they know what they're doing. So that really drew me. And then Dwight Hall, service opportunities also was kind of on my radar, and also kind of being in a place, I think this is a whole nother question, but being in a place like New Haven, where you're not really pretending you're in a suburb of New York or something like that, was also really important for me.
That's excellent. And we'll kind of get into this a little bit because all 3 of you are working in urban settings right now. I mean, Patrick, you're in Austin, right? Yeah. So, and from a different perspectives, right? Theo, you're kind of an urban studies poli-sci, and both Patrick and Laura, you guys are history, right? History majors. Okay. So you're coming at it in kind of different perspectives yet. And we'll get into a little bit. I want to know kind of what made you choose your particular project? And then let's start with that. What made you choose what you're doing? Just kind of briefly describe what it is, and then we'll get into a little bit of the day-to-day, kind of what you've learned, but what kind of got you to be where you are, and briefly describe what your role is. So Laura, I'm gonna start with you because you're at a federal public defender's office, right, in DC. So how did you choose this particular internship?
I've always had an interest in public defense and sort of public interest law more generally. And I knew going into the summer that I wanted to work at a public defender's office, but I wasn't really sure what that would mean in practice. And Honestly, I looked at a lot of federal public defenders because I could sort of split it up, and I knew New York has a few and New England has this many, and I thought DC would be a really interesting place to work, just because it's unique in that it's also, it's not a state. It's sort of, there are a lot of very interesting cases that end up coming through the office. And when I'd interviewed, everyone seemed really lovely and supportive. And it seemed challenging, but in a good way. I was a little bit scared that I would not be able to do a lot of the things they're going to ask of me, but honestly, it was mostly just looking at different federal public defenders, but I didn't have a really good idea of what that actually meant.
So what was your job description that you thought you were doing? I know you had to fill out applications for the fellowship and stuff, and it was very articulate. So explain for us what you thought it was going to be, and then maybe what it actually turned out to be, what it's like now for you.
So the title is investigative intern. I think a lot of public defender's offices have that sort of title. And essentially, that could entail a lot of things. At my office, you work with the investigators, who are basically people who help gather all the evidence for clients and for their cases to defend them. They also help gather character-related information, so interviewing family members to tell judges and explain, this is how this person grew up, this is what their life was like growing up, these were the circumstances they lived in, these are the things I can say about their character. So it's a combination of, it's all sorts of investigative work. So the job description is to assist in that and to assist in helping craft defenses for people. And in terms of how it compares, I think it's a lot more hands-on actually than I thought it would be, and we're able to contribute in a lot more substantive ways than I initially thought. We work a lot one-on-one or with a lawyer and the actual clients, talking to clients, talking to family. Yeah, so I've really, really loved it. But it's essentially working in investigation, which is what helps lawyers present to judges and helps them defend their clients.
Okay, so briefly, because not everybody on the call might know the difference between what's in the jurisdiction of a federal crimes versus state. What kinds of cases, maybe just briefly, are you maybe involved with, or your potential client, your clients are being charged with?
Yeah, so I think the easiest way I would explain it, a lot of the federal cases, my impression is that sometimes at federal offices, there are fewer cases, but all of the cases carry potentially longer sentences. So it really varies in terms of the types of cases that are at the office, but most of them, and then of course there's both share sort of an income designation, so it's all defending clients based on income. But the most common cases I would say are drug possession cases. That's the overwhelming majority. But because of the way that federal sentencing works, it's a lot of the clients, grew up and they were charged with drug possession at one point when they were very young, and then they're charged again. So a lot of the clients tend to have been sort of involved in the criminal legal system for longer. Patrick could probably compare and contrast more, but most of the cases carry potentially long sentences. So and a lot of them go to trial. That's how I would explain it.
Okay, that's great. Patrick, let's turn to you, because you're doing a public defender as well, but you're in a state or statewide, and it's relatively new office as well. Tell us a little bit about let's start with how did you choose this particular project, what you thought the job description was, and how it's going there.
Sure. So I'm working at the Travis County Public Defenders in Austin, Texas. And so my search was kind of similar to Laura's. I just kind of cast my net wide, interviewed lots of places. And I think what really drew me to Austin was A, that it was a new office, B, that it was in the South where I'm from. I'm really passionate about kind of, bringing people back to the South to do good work. And then, so I think, the new office in the South were kind of the two biggest things. And then I guess a third one also would be just that the fact that the city of Austin and its metro area has changed so much in the past 30 years, and even the past 10 years and past 20 years, that Like people being displaced and unhoused people is like a huge issue. And so I really wanted to kind of explore or get to what it looks like whenever rich people move in and how that affects people in the criminal legal system and how is that system used to, further oppress them. And so I think that like my job is pretty similar to ours. We do less of that mitigation work is what we call it, wherever we're kind of interviewing family members to try to find out the background of the client. It really just depends on the case. We do some of that, but not as much because our office also has social workers that do a lot of that. But I'm going and talking to complaining witnesses, which are the people that usually are the ones that calling the police. And if not, they're the ones that, we consider like the victim. I'm in a lot of cases doing some physical evidence work where needed, like collecting evidence, taking photos of what happened, doing lots of social media research. You'll be surprised at what people will put on Facebook. So make sure you always watch what you put on Facebook. Talking to clients about what happened in certain situations, finding people, both our clients and witnesses that don't want to be found or it's not easy for them to be found. And again, like that's where the unhoused part comes in a lot. And so I think that I was just really excited to do this internship. I didn't really know what to expect. I kind of had that same job description, like you're going to go talk to witnesses, you're going to take photos of crime scenes, you're going to like that kind of thing. But it's just been absolutely wonderful. I feel like a first grader, which is great because I don't sit at my desk all day. I go out and I do things and I keep myself entertained by like, splitting up what I'm doing, going and talking to different people. Which is great. And I think like our office handles a lot of different types of cases. Another interesting thing about Austin is that we have a so-called progressive prosecutor. That's a whole nother discussion. But so like a lot of those simple possession cases under a certain amount, if someone's not arrested for something else, the DA will automatically drop those charges or put someone into diversion, depending on what it is. But we handle a lot of aggravated assault cases, which is in assault cases. We have, a couple murder cases. We have lots of things that are related to domestic violence. So some of those aggravated assaults, which is like an assault usually with something else, or like there's some reason that it is aggravated. So lots and lots and lots of domestic violence cases, some unauthorized use of motor vehicle cases, which is like whenever the prosecutors and the police are just too lazy to find out if somebody actually stole a car and they just see if like someone is driving a car that they don't own. So that's a whole nother thing. But, a lot fewer of like, I guess, conspiracy cases, big drug trafficking cases, like that kind of thing. And we also do have sexual assault cases and things like that.
Thanks for painting that picture. Theo, this is sort of appropriate because there have been a couple of references to unhoused and some of the policy and community where people are. And you're working at the New York City Housing Authority. Tell us about how you came there, you chose it, what you thought the description, was supposed to be, and kind of what you're doing on a daily basis a little bit.
Sure, yeah. So my route to this internship was a little bit like unconventional. I think you mentioned, excuse me. You mentioned I am like sort of interested in like urban studies and like looking at urbanism generally. And there was a alumni panel actually in like last October at the architecture school that was open to undergrads as well. And they brought in a bunch of alumni who were sort of working in various aspects of urban planning or design or governance. And it was this super cool event. And I was just talking to someone afterwards and explaining that I was interested in housing policy and the intersections between like, housing justice and the legal system and that sort of thing. So, and luckily enough, this person I was speaking with referred me to someone who works for the New York City Housing Authority. At the time, that person was in the legal department, and then she switched over to the department where I am now. But all this to say that I sort of like was in the right place at the right time and met someone who's really helpful. And she referred me to my current supervisor, Hannah, and her boss, Brad, at the New York City Housing Authority. And that's kind of like how I made my way there. So there wasn't like a built out job description, but when I interviewed, I sort of asked like, what would I be doing? And I think they they outlined a couple of things, but it's what's been really great and what I've really loved is that I've had the opportunity to like kind of pick and choose what I'm doing. I'm specifically within the authorities compliance department, which means that they're sort of like the internal regulatory agency, or like regulatory department for the rest of the agency. So they're drafting a lot of the procedures that the rest of the agency follows, and also looking into some of the different housing developments, and especially the ones that are like at the highest risks for unsafe conditions, and kind of doing corrective action plans for those different developments. So I, from the start, was sort of expecting to get some field experience going out on these site visits, doing surveys, kind of taking stock of the physical conditions at some of the New York City Housing Authority's like developments, and then also have been doing some office work, doing like helping with procedures, and I expected also to do some data analytics for their agency, and I've been able to do that as well. So that's been really great. But I guess I expected sort of doing like field stuff and data stuff, but I've also had a really great opportunity to connect with some of the legal interns in the office and the department, or the authorities law department. And I've been working with them on some research projects and kind of just helping out with kind of miscellaneous things around the office. But it's been like surprisingly like diverse. I think I've done memos on like, you know, potentially implementing like different types of plumbing in our developments, all the way to like navigating relationships between some private developers and the authority at a broader scale. So it's been really like really diverse, more varied than I was expecting.
That's great. Thank you for sharing, all of you, about kind of what's going on in the day to day. I want to pull back a little bit and think and ask you some questions about your majors and what you've been studying on campus. And now you've had a couple of summers, and how those related. Each of you wrote beautiful applications, and I know Mark Fopiano and Dwight Hall asked you some of those, like, why did you choose your major and what's the relevance? And each of you brought up some different themes. So I'm curious to know, kind of mostly way through this particular summer, does that still hold true for you? Have you thought about kind of what you've been learning on campus, or maybe in inspirational courses or ideas and theories, and how is that playing into what you're doing now, to the extent you've had a chance to reflect on it? Laura, do you want to start?
Yeah, so I'm a history major, as I said before, but within that, obviously that's very broad. I've tried to take a lot of different classes, a lot of different regions, but I'm ultimately focused on, and I think looking to write my thesis in sort of legal history. So I'm interested in a lot of histories of policing and histories of prisons and histories of basically ideas of, kind of very broadly, ideas of justice and how different societies and groups have thought about justice and punishment and like fairness. So all of these things. And I'm also interested, so I think that connects pretty obviously to the public defense idea. I think a lot about what we think about, how we think about justice, and how we think about what reconciliation could really mean, and, you know, in what ways is, like, when people think about incarceration as a positive thing, where is that coming from, and how can we move towards like thinking about other ideas of bringing people together and conflict resolution and all these things. So that's sort of like a more like, I'm not even philosophical, I'm not a philosophy major, but those are ideas and they're connected that I think a lot about in the history major. And then I'm also interested in just like the history of people who are marginalized in society. So the treatment of unhoused people. I know Theo and Patrick were talking about that. So very broadly, but yeah, I think it's that interest like in social histories and an evolution of ideas of justice.
And we found that to kind of be informative in how you interact with people you're interviewing or preparing defenses for. Does that play, do you think, into your mind at all? Help give it some reality, or does it sort of seem disconnected, maybe the history of things and what's in front of you at the moment, or do you kind of sort of see the connections?
I think in some ways the history, especially if you think about American history and I think understanding like the roots of mass incarceration and the war on drugs, that's really important and essential and very relevant. Like almost all of the clients I talk to in our office, like you can see their lives directly impacted by drug laws and by sentencing. But I think it's also in some ways, I think history as a field is really interesting because you're focusing oftentimes in stories on individual people and on their stories and on their sort of humanity. And I think that's really important in public defense, if it's done well, is just being able to show people like this is much more complicated than you're trying to make it out to be. And everyone has really important stories to tell. And so I think that's where I see the connection too.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Patrick, you're also a history major. How does those kind of academic studies and your interest tie into maybe the work you're doing in a daily basis?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think that for me, I'm not necessarily like when I'm going to talk to a witness, I'm not kind of trying to rehash all of what's going on with, the war on drugs. It depends on the day, but probably not going to do that. But I think that for me, like taking last semester a seminar on the war on drugs and the war on crime and the war on gangs with Professor Elizabeth Hinton was a really informative experience for me. It was something that, it's one thing, I guess, to kind of go into your job or go into your work or what you feel called to do and just kind of be like, I want to get my client out on bond today. Not that that's what my internship is doing necessarily, but, kind of thinking about that as a goal in my investigation or something like that. It's kind of one thing to do that. And it's really, really easy to get burned out doing that. But I think that you become a better, advocate for your clients when you understand the long term that this is in, that your job is not just your job is to get your client out on bond, right? But it's also whenever you have any chance and it serves the interest of your client, you need to be fighting the system. And you need to be fighting the system, not just because it's bad now, but because it's been bad and it hasn't changed from being bad. And whenever you think about I think that for me, like a big part of history is looking at revolutionaries and looking at, the way that people have imagined a future. And that's, pushed, a mass group of people forward, right? Like whether that's in the United States, whether that's something radical in the South, because there is something that's radical in the South, or if that's something that's in the global South, like resistance to empire, resistance to like the British Empire, there are a lot of lessons that we can learn. And I think there are lessons from the 70s, especially, legal, like the trial of the Chicago 7 happening at the Democratic National Conventions, as well as kind of like the British Black Panthers and their protest against police and those kind of things. Like it's a whole big thing that, history, I think kind of tells me, like Laura said, everything does kind of connect to each other. And we have to understand that maybe we aren't going to get everything. We're not going to be able to burn down the White House this year, but, in the future we can kind of go and realize that we have a place in hopefully, bringing power to the people that really deserve it.
That's a great take on this. Theo, you're coming from a slightly different, disciplines, poli-sci and urban studies. Talk a little bit about, that major, why you chose it, and how maybe that's applying to what you're doing now.
Sure. I will say I really do love the history department and have flirted with the idea of double majoring in history. So it's a strong theme here. But yes, I'm currently declared as a political science major with a concentration in urbanism. So I actually came into Yale with this interest in urbanism, and at first sort of sought it out through the urban studies department, which is actually kind of how I got to this internship in the grand scheme of things. But I find that department is very almost design oriented, and I'm more interested in the policy side of things. So I've been focusing on I switched over into political science and have been able to still take some classes in the urban studies department, take classes also in history that have been able to kind of inform my political science framework with the topics of urbanism. And that I think spans, even though it's my concentration, I think urbanism is a huge field. So I've taken some really excellent classes kind of confronting how like physical infrastructures have played a role in colonial subjugation, and I've taken some design classes in urban studies and lots of different things. But one thing I really enjoy, especially about how the department runs at Yale, is that there's an emphasis on looking at quantitative data and using that to support some of the qualitative things that we are more readily available. And I think taking some like statistical classes, and I'm using some skills that I learned in a class that I'm counting towards my major that was on doing data analytics through like software, and that has been really helpful in doing some of the work for this internship this summer. So I think a lot of similarities with the types of issues we're looking at between history and political science, and I think the methodology is just a little bit more quantitative, which is something that I enjoy. Yeah, so I think that's my major. I think I was really interested in this internship though, specifically because while this concentration in urbanism does exist, there aren't a ton of like housing specific classes, at least right now at Yale. So I was really looking to get some experience kind of in that field. And I think like it's been hugely informative and really has sparked my thinking about looking towards a thesis, and just kind of immersing myself in the housing policy world has been really fantastic from kind of a interest in academics perspective, as well as like a professional experience.
No, that's great, because I want to follow up with this to ask each of you, like, how has this particular internship helped you learn about what it is you want to do or not want to do? And maybe it's just this, helps you focus on what your thesis will be for your senior thesis, and or kind of career trajectory. So let's stay with you. Obviously, it's been really helpful because you haven't been able to get some of the exposure. Right. So how has that helped? Do you have a little bit clearer idea where it is you want to go?
Yeah, I would definitely say so. I'm still learning for sure, but I think one thing I've really been kind of like forced into figuring out was the kind of like different federal subsidies for housing, and how this is like, I'm working for a public housing authority, and I've been kind of in this interesting, I guess, context, because the New York City Housing Authority is by far the largest in the country. The next largest one, I think, it's like a tenth of the size or something. So it's kind of this exception in a country where that has kind of politically and intentionally like underfunded and limited public housing and social housing policies. So it's been really informative to work in a place where, despite those like legislative and like policy kind of I guess pressures against public housing, it has still been able to maintain homes for a lot of people, and I think that's been really inspiring and interesting. One thing that I have sort of like sparked kind of an itch to research, I guess, is I was talking with my boss the other day, and because there's nothing else in the United States that really compares to the size of this organization, they've been kind of bouncing ideas off of and communicating with some of the housing authorities or public housing, social housing agencies in Europe, especially like Paris, I think has a large one. And I think it'd be really interesting to kind of do a comparative analysis of how other countries that are doing social housing better, and how we can maybe bring some of those strategies and policies to the US. So I think that has been really interesting.
Any further thoughts about where you might go with your career or graduate school or whatever afterwards?
Yeah, I think working at this office has been really, I've sort of kind of had this idea that I'd like to work in a large municipal government office, like just in general. And I think the experience, both with the work that I'm doing and also like the people that I'm surrounded with in the office, has really inspired me and kind of confirmed that suspicion that this is something I would like to do potentially long term. Thinking about grad school, I think probably from the interests of like Patrick and Laura, like I'm also thinking about legal systems and potentially going to law school and pursuing I guess an emphasis on housing policy and law, and maybe doing something in that field, but it feels a ways away to me at this point. So I'll
Yeah,
probably,
that's fine.
but I think in general, that's the trajectory. And this experience has been really great for confirming kind of my
That's
suspicion
awesome.
that I like this. Yeah.
That's great. Patrick, I saw you were both nodding your head. Patrick, what would you say you've learned either about yourself or the type of work you want to do and kind of how it might be moving forward?
Yeah, well, I think I've learned that this is the type of work I want to do.
Great.
And so, yeah, it's definitely something that next summer and, after graduation, I do want to do public defense investigation, and probably in a different urban context, something that, where people are a lot more concentrated, a place like New York or DC. And I think that, yeah, out on the academic side, I'm just kind of continuing in my passion for anti-imperial, organizing and resistance. And I'll probably end up writing my thesis in the end on, the war on drugs in Arkansas or something like that, or exploring kind of the relationship between, anti-imperialism in the global South and resistance to white power in the American South. So I think those things are kind of tied. I think that about myself, I've learned that there are some things that there are not many things, or depending on the communities I'm going into, oftentimes being a white man that looks like me, who could easily be a cop or CPS, is not a good look. But I certainly have found there are certain settings where that's very useful, anything involving the jail or the courthouse or whatever. I get treated the way that they treat white men, which is not cool. They should not do that. But if they do, I'm going to use it against them as much as I can. And I think that also I don't know, there's a joke in the office kind of that I have the white man's confidence, I'm happy to do whatever. And so that has served me well. I am fine going into the woods and trying to find someone and that kind of stuff. So I think that I've been able to kind of break out and just kind of explore all of the different things that this job can do, and I'm super happy to do it in the future.
Right, Laura, what about you? I know you were not as familiar with DC before you started in this office, so maybe about kind of living there and the job and the work, and what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'd never been to DC really before this summer. And no, I really love it as a city, and I also really love the office. I think maybe similar to Patrick, one thing that I really noticed is the kind of people who work in this office I get along really well with, and they're just very passionate, but they're also very, very funny. And I think because the work can be kind of overwhelming sometimes, and because there's a lot of it can be very heavy, they have a very good sense of humor and they're very upbeat, and I really enjoy the environment. I think I'm definitely still interested in public defense, and definitely still interested in the law and leveraging the law in ways to help people, to help marginalized people, especially. I think one thing that has come up for me this summer is also thinking about, especially when you talking to clients and talking to clients' families, it's just so easy to see. So it's just everything is sort of so based on upbringing, and so based on childhood, and based on the resources people had access to in childhood. And a lot of the clients in our office grew up and were abused, and had to work from a very young age, and were sort of lost in the education system, and all of these things. And if they were incarcerated once, when they got out, they couldn't really find a job, so there are so many hurdles. And it's just, I've also thought a lot about potentially working in somewhere a little bit before, because with a lot of the clients at our office, they're all kind of in a really tough spot. They're facing really sometimes very serious charges. It's very hard to win cases at trial before federal judges. And although today actually the office did win a case, which is very interesting. But yeah, so it's very unusual. And a lot of what the office actually does has to do with sentencing, because it's so hard to get clients acquitted on all charges. So a lot of it is mitigation, and it's doing all of this work to try to really, and negotiating with prosecutors, which is impossible to do. And so it's very interesting. It's very meaningful work. It definitely needs to be done. But I'm also thinking about, different areas, maybe in education or different areas in other kinds of policy, that might also make an impact, because it's just sad. So it's just very sad to see how people are sort of left behind at a very early age. And yeah, but overall, I think very, very positive experience. Really wonderful office with a lot of characters. Yeah.
With that, and any of you can take this, do you have a particular, maybe a project or an event or an interaction that was like the best day you've had so far, or is like the worst day or the worst thing that, and kind of what was it and how'd you learn from it? Laura, do you want to keep going with this? If you have one in mind, could be something, whatever. So what do you have?
I had a pretty good day today. I was talking to a client. I went with one of the attorneys to one of the jails, and we were just talking. So we were doing some of the mitigation related stuff. It was really helpful, but then also like we just ended up talking about random things also, because if someone's, in jail all the time, they want to talk about things that aren't their case sometimes. So that was nice. I did have one, it wasn't a bad day, but I've had to serve subpoenas a few times. And one time when I served one, just because we need sometimes like video footage. So I served it to this one business, and this woman was extremely unhappy. But overall, it went well. But it's kind of a nerve-wracking thing where I need to go in and tell you that.
Yeah, sure, I can imagine. Theo or Patrick, do either of you have a, good day, bad day kind of story to tell? Either one.
Yeah, I have a couple. I think that like there are a
Sure.
lot of days where you're like, oh, this doesn't look good. Let me see what I can do to like, try to prepare some kind of evidence for defense or like talk to people. I think we've had recently like a case in a client where like, they were absolutely justified in what they did. And I think that it was the one case because of the person's identity that like everyone kind of went along with it, which was good. And like, we were able to kind of get them settled in a way that I didn't expect in a very serious case. It also like showed me, it was like, okay, if you have this certain identity, like the cops might listen to you. And I'm like, okay, they've never done this for any of my other clients. And so it's kind of interesting. I also think of like, I went with an attorney to do intake to get new clients, and we went and talked to one, and it was late, probably 7 or 8, and then we woke up the next morning like early like 5 to go talk to this one magistrate judge who we knew would sign the bond but was only going to be on duty for a certain amount of time, and we got that, and we got the client out of jail within like 12 hours, and I thought that was really exciting and not something that happens a lot.
That's great. Theo, do you have any particular story, good or bad, you want to share?
Sure. This story is kind of like both good and bad. I sort of early on, I attended a site visit at one of our properties in like Far Rockaway, which is like deep in Queens. And it was, I would say like the bad was it's very like, I think it's very jarring to see some of the conditions of these buildings that were built, sometimes like 80, 90 years ago at this point. And, I think some of the conditions are, it's difficult to see that the properties aren't, in better shape because of lack of funding, and also that how old these things are. And I think that can be sometimes really discouraging. And I also was sort of like shadowing this inspection team that was investigating like the elevators, which, side note, like I never thought I would learn as much about elevators as I did that day. Like I will never look at them the same again. But anyway, I followed them, and they were kind of like, they had this like really negative attitude about the building and some of their clients. But I also, after that day, I was talking to the supervisor I went out with, and we were talking about how, it's very easy to make these judgments about like the way people are living and the conditions of these buildings, but examining that it's more of a structural than an individual issue, and how maintaining a taking this experience of seeing the work that needs to be done, and really using that as something that motivates and kind of grounds the work that you're doing when you're sitting in your office in Manhattan was was really important, and I think something I've definitely been hanging on to this whole summer, just keeping that perspective, I guess. So good and bad.
Okay, that's great. And we've got a good question, and I want to encourage anybody in the audience to feel free to put something in chat or Q&A. And this is good both for alumni to kind of reflect back and know what you guys are experiencing now, and also to help maybe other students or future students. Do you think you were well prepared, or how, or did the Yale or your undergraduate experience prepare you or not prepare you to handle the work you're doing now? And are there any recommendations you would have to a student as far as like, you wish you had known this, or make sure you do X before, if you're going to do this kind of a job or something like that? Who wants to start? Theo, so just stop with you. We'll go ahead and pick up again.
That sounds good. I was thinking about this. I saw it in the chat, and I think in some ways, definitely, like I sort of mentioned, I've taken some like data analytics classes that have been, without those classes, I don't think I would have been able to do half of what I've been doing this summer. And I think additionally, like working through Dwight Hall, I think everybody, all three of us are urban fellows or were at some point. And my placement site was with New Haven City Plan, and having that opportunity to sort of work within a municipal government and to kind of have that experience, but also being comfortable like taking that and taking the work you're doing out into the field and kind of immersing yourself in a neighborhood where you're maybe not familiar with, definitely made me comfortable to like take on some of the field work aspects of this internship. I think on the other hand, like what I've really loved is that this internship feels a lot like kind of the opposite of Yale, which can sometimes feel very like isolated or like inward facing sometimes, just doing like research and submitting papers and like doing classwork and that sort of thing. And I really love how applied this has felt. So I think I've definitely like gained some skills in Yale, but I was also really happy to bring those to a completely different context that felt very like on the ground, I guess.
Advice for you wish you had known, or advice for other students who are doing this, what would you recommend, Theo?
I would definitely, I sort of mentioned this already, but I would definitely recommend to students the Urban Fellows program. I think any other opportunity to kind of have Yale support to taking your time and your energy and your interests out into the community surrounding Yale and New Haven. I think that's really important. I think it can be very easy to just do things that like serve other Yale students or like are within the Yale community. And I think those are great. And, I'm not like, I'm in the band, I do other like Yale things, but it's really great to have an experience where you can kind of break out of that bubble that everyone very easily falls into. And I'd recommend, any opportunity that takes you out into New Haven with some support, I think is really great.
All right, Patrick, do you want to go?
Yeah, I think when I first saw that question, I'm not gonna lie, my first response in my head was like, absolutely not. But I think that it's more complicated. I think that classwork has been interesting, and like I said, I think that historical context is interesting. I'm talking about like one particular class, right? And I think Yale as an institution has done a pretty bad job, just because I think the things that are preached often, whether it's literally or if it's something that's kind of under the surface, is that money is really good. Accumulation of money is like a really good thing. That's how we get things like the Schwarzman Center, and that undemocratic governance is important because that's how the Board of Trustees works, and that police are good and they do a good job protecting us because there's YPD cars everywhere. And things like, and you don't go to this neighborhood because that's where the bad people live, and that kind of stuff. And that's like really not been helpful, I think, but I think I kind of was already skeptical of that. So I think that, it was good for me to, get out and not have those preconceived notions. I think that, working at the volunteer income tax clinic at the New Haven Library was like a great experience, because I think I got to work and try to help people that like were very understandably frustrated by the IRS, because who's not frustrated by the IRS? And just like being able to not just be an experience, like Theo said, with Yale students, but to kind of understand your privilege and your place, and like maybe understand that like the role that you're playing is like really, really small in somebody's life, and they're bringing a lot of different issues and a lot of oppression and marginalization that's happened over their lifetime. And I'm just like, I want to get your tax return done, right, you know. And so I think kind of holding that has been really important, and the same thing, you know, applying to my internship this summer.
Great. Laura, what were your thoughts? And then we'll turn to some questions in the audience.
Yeah, I think there are some things that you definitely learn. There are some things I think I agree with Patrick that like I've done at Yale to do with some stuff through the Urban Fellows as well. So I work at the New Haven. It's always being renamed, but it's essentially the department that supports formerly incarcerated people. And so a lot of that work has definitely been really relevant, and I would really second, like in terms of advice, the Urban Fellowship is great. A lot of the finding funding to do this work is really important, and other support and meeting other students. But I think a lot of it is not really learned at a university. I think a lot of what this internship has taught me is more just to do with, you know, how can you have I don't want to say social skills, but sort of like, you know, can you talk to someone even if you have like nothing in common with them? Can you sincerely communicate with someone? Because I think it's one thing to sort of be able to talk to other lawyers. I'm not that I'm a lawyer, but it's one thing for a lawyer to be able to talk to other lawyers about the law. It's a very different thing to be able to talk to a family member who's confused because they're like, why are they taking a plea deal? They're not guilty. You know what I mean? They didn't do it. So it's all this so I think it's something I think you sort of learn by doing, being able to communicate well. Yeah, that's the biggest thing I've honestly learned. It's really hard to communicate, honestly. There are also a lot of, like, I think Patrick mentioned this, but just like by virtue of the fact that a lot of public defenders are white, a lot of public defenders have a different educational background, a different socioeconomic background. There are already barriers to communication, but I think it's sort of, yeah, that's sort of learned by doing. That's learned by being honest, being clear about communicating, all of these things. So it's very much like you just get told to do something and then you do it and you're like, okay. Yeah.
So let's talk about just the support, what could be done better, not just from the university, but what alumni can do. Obviously, this fellowship, Dwight Hall managed it, but we had a lot of alumni come up through Yana and funding to make sure you guys and other students had the ability to at least not have to worry so much about supporting yourselves financially. What else do you think could be done? Like, what else would make your and students like you better able to pursue these kinds of internships and careers in social impact? You're on mute.
Yeah.
There you go. Go ahead.
Hopefully not frozen. Okay, here
There
we
you
go.
go.
Yeah, I think I'll start us off kind of like with basics. I think, like, you know, for students who are coming from like low to moderate income backgrounds, it can definitely feel like a kind of opportunity cost situation to like do something, volunteering for a nonprofit, especially because, you know, nonprofits or, you know, government agencies sometimes even like don't really have the funds to pay interns or pay them enough. So I think it often comes down to like, you know, continuing support of programs that are supporting students financially. And, you know, I think a second part of that would be like really expanding and really putting it out there, like what sort of opportunities exist for people. I feel very lucky at Yale. I have a lot of friends who are coming from a similar like low income background as I am, and I think there's been a lot of solidarity in that, and also like people kind of tell each other about things, and it's often like very word of mouth. But I think really, you know, if I didn't have that, I don't know if I would know about all these really great programs that can give you funding, that can, you know, I'm living in New York this summer, which I no way would have had the budget for if it wasn't for like fellowships. And I think sort of like doing more to make other students aware of what things are available to them, I think would be a really good step.
Okay. Laura, what were your maybe some thoughts about that? What more could be done?
Yeah, I would agree. I think I've definitely talked to students before who at Yale who definitely would have. I think it was Urban Fellows. I guess I was talking to someone about who would have loved to know about it, but just didn't know. And I think I think they are pretty well publicized, but I think it's always just more and more just trying to get the word out to as many people as possible, because like Theo said, it's definitely a trade-off, and it makes a big difference. I mean, I don't think internships should be unpaid in the first place, but it's oftentimes just the result of like the office I'm working at has no money for anything, let alone paying interns. So it's definitely really helpful. I think we had this conversation at a meeting, at sort of an internal meeting, but I think different resources about one idea we were talking about is different resources and training about sort of mental health. And I think a lot of the work that interns do, and this isn't to, say that it's the same as sort of experiencing something, but if you're sort of witnessing something that could be potentially traumatic, or maybe you're just thrown in and you're an undergrad and you're like, whoa, there's a lot of new things for me to be experiencing. So I think things that are sort of directing compassion towards yourself and teaching people in this work that, like, especially young people, that's an important thing too. And if you call it service or whatever, like, you still need to take care of yourself and everything. So resources like that, I think the meetings, building community, those things are great. Yeah.
Great. Patrick, did we hear from you in this last thought?
Not yet.
Okay.
Yeah, I want to echo everything that Theo and Laura said. I think I can definitely relate to the I guess first, just the squish for funding as it comes time for summer. I feel like I stressed out about that way more than I did about applying to internships and getting all of that figured out. And so I'm so thankful that Yana stepped up in that way. And I've also had those conversations of I've had so many people that, my friends, there's people I know, and, oh yeah, I do Urban Fellows. What's Urban Fellows? I explain, oh, that's cool, I should apply for that. Yeah, you should. But then I don't, when does the next cycle come around? That kind of thing. And I think that, there are other programs that Yana is supporting that I think should continue to be supporting. Fellow Arkansan Olivia Pascal's Go South is something that I think that, alumni should continue to find. And anything that's putting Yaleys not in a place of I'm going to go, do my own thing and just kind of try to figure it out, but to go places that are under-resourced, where there are people already fighting the good fight, and where you can kind of step alongside and expand their capacity in that work, and maybe provide, an extra warm body to go do something. I think that's really important. And so I'd encourage all alumni and other people to donate to those kind of things.
That's a great shout out. Thank you. There's a really interesting question from someone in the audience about acknowledging that each of you has displayed a sense of resilience, whether it's your personal backgrounds, it's what you've done in college, what you're doing now in your work. What keeps you going? I mean, you all seem to exhibit a sense of reality checking, but also kind of positive energy about being able to actually make a difference and understanding what the players are. But the days you have that are bad, or maybe the days where whatever it may be, what's kind of kept you going through everything in your life and through school and work right now? What are some ideas? Patrick, want to stay with you since you just finished? We'll stay with you.
Sure. I think that I've just been so excited, that all of my coworkers are just really, really, really good at their jobs, and also really, really, really focused on making sure that people are taking time for themselves. That's not to say I'm not working 10-hour days or 12-hour days a lot, because that happens. But I think after that happens, taking time to kind of slow down a little bit has been really important. Being able to just kind of sit and process. I think that a lot of kind of those secondhand trauma, things that we experience, being able to really process that with attorneys and with investigators that I'm working with has been important. And they're always so good about checking in. Was that okay? How are you feeling after that? And you don't have to be, okay with the situation that you just came out of. That's been so important. And I think that also just having lots of colleagues, that there are times when we can kind of outside of a professional setting, like in like happy hours and things like that, really get to know my colleagues and kind of get to just like say bad things about the judges that we don't like. And like, did you hear what this person did? Like that kind of stuff like really has been great. And so I've loved that.
That's great. Theo?
Yeah, I think like echoing what Patrick just said, I think being surrounded by people who are committed to the good fight and who are really, I think I'm surrounded by a lot of people who could be doing kind of the same or similar work like anywhere, but sort of the intentionality of, dedicating time and effort to what I think is like a really important and valuable cause is really inspiring. I think like it can often be hard. I struggle with various aspects of this internship kind of day to day. I think things can be challenging. Simple things like not having stats programs running, or conceptual things like, wow, like this issue is so huge. Like, are we doing enough? And I think what really like brings me back and grounds me is that doing anything that is trying to help, I think is better than not, which is simple, but I think something that definitely like refocuses me on, I think, the important mission of the work. And I think it's a lot easier to kind of get that snap back into the right attitude when you're, like Patrick said, surrounded by people who are also really dedicated. So I've I think that's what keeps me going.
That's great. Laura, what about you?
Yeah, I think I agree with what Patrick and Theo have said. A lot of the people I'm working with are so passionate and energetic, and like I said today, they want to try, which is just so unusual to win a federal trial at a public defender's office. They were so excited, and just I think it's sort of those things. There was some email that I didn't fully read, but that someone sent around, and it had this sort of like starfish analogy, and it was like, you do this work not because it's going to work all the time, but because once in a while, like you find a way to really help. And I think like that's the starfish or something, but I didn't fully grasp what they were saying. But I think that's really motivating, and also just a sense of like you have bad days, but like Patrick was saying, processing things well. That I don't have that much experience, but that's sort of what I've gotten a sense of. It's good. It's important to do that. It's important to, be proud of yourself when you do something you think is good, and kind of keep that momentum. And I think in general, just thinking about, it can really make a difference for someone. And at least in our office, like you are sometimes one of the only people, you in the legal team, or sometimes some of the only people in someone's life really in their corner and really helping them. So I think that's very motivating. And I think humor also is, because I've noticed that a lot of everyone in that office is just, also like exchanging all these stories. Like, did you hear what they said? And like, yeah.
That's great. That's like a really practical thing. Well, we're about at the end of the hour, and I know that you guys have all certainly inspired me, and I'm sure I'm speaking on behalf of the audience and all the alumni and who are listening live now or will be. And we do want you to know that we're in your corner. And I know just a little bit through this fellowship and a couple of touches we've had throughout the summer, but we want to welcome you when you get there to the alumni community, but you also have access to it. And through Yana, we are here for you. And I hope that you will continue to reach out and share, and you may or may not ever need more help, but you're certainly teaching us when we learn about what you're doing, and you're the next generation being leaders and taking what you've applied. And we all have some sort of shared experience of being in New Haven, different majors and campuses. And it's fascinating. And I know it's very touching to hear about what each of you is doing and how inspiring you are, the communities you found, the work that you're doing in different communities and in New Haven and bringing back. And so I agree, keep a sense of humor, keep a check on yourselves. Please feel free to call on us if there's anything we can do. And I hope you don't mind. We're working, another Yale student, Cindy Dashi, is a intern for Yana ourselves, and we're working on a social impact career guide. So I hope you won't mind. We may pull some of your quotes as advice and thoughts for this, and we hope maybe we can get copies of that to you as something else that can be shared with, did you know? Here are some things that a whole nother community has been doing, and it's not only just the summer projects that you guys are doing, but things that alumni are doing, and to kind of envision these pathways and create those communities and the support where someone can say, yeah, I know what it's like to have those bad days or what it's like to do that. And so we want to kind of help build it out, and appreciate all the work you guys are doing. And I'm sure we'll be maybe back in touch with you for a few more quotes. But well, thank you each for joining and sharing your experiences. Really appreciate it, and best of luck with the end of the rest of your summer projects. And hope you can take a little time to yourselves before you get back to campus, and stay in touch. And I hope to see you back in New Haven in the not too distant future.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Theo, Laura, Patrick, thanks very much. Have a great evening and take care.